I grew up in Ashland, Oregon, Southern Oregon, and met my husband in college, and moved to the Bay Area when he went to Alaska to seek fame and fortune. Actually, tried to make money, and he wanted to go to grad school and didn't get accepted. He was from Lakeview, kind of a difficult family life, but anyway, part Dallas, Texas, and part Lakeview, and he followed me to the Bay Area, and the draft board in it was during Vietnam, and the draft board in Lakeview said, you know, if you don't join someplace, we're gonna join for you. And so Mike went down and went through the process and ended up joining the Marines. And about that time that he was going through all this, I started working for Flying Tiger Line, and as a flight attendant, and my flights were all to Vietnam. And so I went to Vietnam before my husband did. So he went through Marine Corps training, and we got married in November of 1968, and I always said that was the stupidest thing for anybody to get married right before they got deployed, but what did we do? Which turned out to be a good thing, because we've been married almost 50 years. But at any rate, we got married, and our first Christmas I was in Japan and he was in Vietnam. And so it was kind of a blessing, because, as I said before, our time really wasn't real to me, and I was flying to Vietnam, and actually a couple of times I got to talk to him over the radio. I'd go into the operations center and they'd place a call, and he'd be out in the field and we'd be able to call. Of course, you couldn't talk about anything important because there were all kinds of people around listening. So, but it was that was a comfort.
How about the mothers of your mother and his mother?
Well, Mike's mom was in Dallas, Texas at the time, and my mom in Oregon. And communication was much more difficult then. It cost a lot of money to make a long distance call, and Mike and I certainly weren't calling. We had little cassette recorders, but it's so difficult to talk to a recorder.
Yes.
You go, what am I going to say now? And that was not very successful. We sent a few tapes back and forth, but mostly it was letters, and he was a much better letter writer than I was at the time. And I think it was totally unreal for Mike's mom. She was incredibly worried, but he'd been raised part of the time by his dad in Oregon and part of the time by her. She was not used to his daily physical presence, so I'm sure that helped. And communication was just not even close to what it is now. He was there for 13 months. Actually, he was not there for 13 months. He was there for 7, I believe, or 8. And he had everybody knew that I was a flight attendant. I was flying in there, and one day his CO came to him and said, "Your wife's the one that's a flight attendant, right?" She goes through Okinawa, and he's yes, and the CO said, "Pack your bags. You're going to Okinawa." So I was able to see him in Okinawa. And then, so he was there, he was deployed 13 months. And then came back, and we went, and I quit my job, and we moved to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. That was our first time living together, really, as man and wife.
Mm-hmm. How long did you stay there?
We were there probably, now you're asking me the hard questions, Pat. Probably about, I don't know, maybe even less than a year, maybe a year, and he was deployed again on a med cruise. And so he got deployed a lot. So I went back to Ashland and worked while he was gone. And then we went back to North Carolina, and so we haven't been Mike retired in 1994, but we didn't have as many moves as a lot of people do. We were 11 years in Northern Virginia, and our daughter was born in Guam actually in 1974, and then our son at Camp Pendleton in 77. So he just turned 40 December.
So where did they grow up?
So our daughter, we came back from Guam, and we went to Camp Pendleton, and then Casey was born in 77, so when Lindsay was almost 4. And then we moved to Northern Virginia for 11 years, and Mike had different jobs, but we were able to live in the same home, so it was a huge gift, and the kids stayed in the same school district. But Mike went to Okinawa during that time. He was at Defense Intelligence Agency. It was kind of all over the place, and in the middle of that, we were also in Quantico. That's when Lindsay was a toddler. So we were but 11 years in one place, in one home. So I had the home and the kids, which was often the case, and Mike had to be deployed, and so when we moved to, our last tour of duty was in Camp Pendleton in 1990. And 2 weeks after we got there, Mike was deployed for Desert Storm. And once again, I had the house and the kids and the friends, and he was off. And then after that, he did Somalia and the LA riots, and Somalia was awful. The living conditions were awful. If I tried to send him a package, it would most likely get stolen. So he was the commanding officer of a group called the SRIG, Surveillance, Reconnaissance, and Intelligence Group. I can't believe I remember that. But anyway, they would send supply planes over, and so I was able, because he was a commanding officer, to put packages on with food. They were there for, I can't remember, around 6 months, I think. And they lived totally on MREs. Totally.
On what? I'm sorry?
Meals ready to eat, the packaged meals.
Okay.
And Mike said for the first time in his life, he ate to live. We all live to eat, or most of us, like me.
Yes.
But you eat those packaged meals day in and day out, and he forced himself to eat. Knew he had to eat. So he was pretty skinny when he came home. I think it's terrible, terrible way to treat our troops, but that's another story. But and then Mike decided to retire, and we, I thought within reason it should be his choice where we moved, because I wasn't going to go to Lakeview, but I thought, and he always loved Bend, and so it's great. So that's how we ended up here in 1994.
And your son graduated high school then here, correct?
Here. He was a junior in high school. He thought his life was over because there was no water polo in the schools, and he had gotten pretty used to the beach and blondes. So, and his dad was going to be teaching in his high school, because Mike got a job. He started the ROTC here in the high schools here in Central Oregon. Started at Mountain View High School, and so Dad was going to be in his high school. But it was such a positive move moving here. The freedom at that time that the kids had to get out of school, get out of class, and they could head to the lake and swim. They could, it was just, we lived in Vista, Southern California, and Casey and he made some good friends. It took about 9 weeks, and they'd go downtown and play pool. And I'd say, gee, you never did that in Vista. He says, don't you remember, Mom? It was not safe to go down there after dark and visit. I go, oh yeah, that's right. So it was wonderful, in spite of no water polo. It was wonderful.
So what was the effect of your husband's deployments on your son?
I don't think the kids really realized that Mike was even in the Marines. I mean, we once they could remember, we lived off base, and it was like another dad going off to work. And a lot of times Mike would, up to a certain point, the military was not allowed to wear uniforms off base, and so he'd go to work and change clothes. And one time when Mike was working at DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, Casey called him at work and asked if he could ask whoever answered if he could speak to Lieutenant Brock. And Mike's men all thought that was hilarious because Mike was lieutenant colonel, and it's a big difference. But Casey had no idea really what it meant until we got to Camp Pendleton, and Mike was deployed for Desert Storm. Then Mike by that time was a colonel, and the outreach from the community. There's a lot of military, and we were with the San Clemente end of the base. And a lot of retired military, a lot of people. By that time, it was totally different from Vietnam, and we didn't have that discussion about what it was like when he came home from Vietnam, which was another pretty ugly story. But at that time, the families were really celebrated, and the kids got a clue that, gee, their dad was a big deal. Yeah, it all of a sudden Dad wasn't just Dad, but Dad was somebody important. I think that.
And at what age did he start thinking of joining?
I don't think he ever did because Casey was really smart but not a motivated student, and so it was always like And so but he ultimately, he did get his degree in biology. And I think, and he had joined ROTC to help with paying his way through college. And I think he thought, because he didn't get good grades, and this is just me saying, I think he thought because he wasn't at the top of his class that he probably, this was his best choice, which was absolutely not true. But and so when people said, how could you send your son to the Marines, we go, you don't know our son. We can't send him to the doctor. We can't send him anywhere. He is his own person. Casey was a born leader, always has been. His friends go, okay, Casey, now what we can do, sometimes not to the good. But it all worked out. So yeah, he's a very strong person. He's my definitely high maintenance kid. But he embraced it. He's incredible at what he does.